Trump's 3-day nation visit to the Middle East has been filled with opulent ceremonies and deal-making. The White House says the trip saw $600 billion in deals in Saudi Arabia, but according to the Financial Times, the actual figure is half that number.
Look, nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? And I don't believe anything's going to happen, whether you like it or not, until he and I get together. Look.
US President Trump says he will meet Putin as soon as he can, but expect no Ukraine peace deal until then. Russian President Putin has been a no-show for talks in Turkey, this despite Ukrainian President Zelensky's plea to attend. Meanwhile, the first direct talks in 3 years between Russia and Ukrainian officials begin in Turkey. No breakthrough is expected. The Trump administration is stepping up its action against Harvard after withdrawing billions in research funding. The Ivy League university is now being investigated by the Justice Department. Reports say the probe will examine if Harvard has been complying with a landmark Supreme Court ruling that said race can no longer be a factor in granting admissions. Our top story, high-level trade talks between India and the US. Indian Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal is in Washington, D.C. May 17th to the 20th. At the heart of the discussions, those punishing tariffs on Indian goods imported into the US. The talks over the weekend come amid claims by Trump that India offered to drop all tariffs on US goods imported into India. That's a claim New Delhi was quick to dismiss.
And they've offered us a deal where basically they're willing to literally charge us no tariff. So we go from the highest tariff, you couldn't do business in India, we're not even a top 30 in India because the tariff is so high, to a point where they have actually told us, I assume you too, Scott, you were working on that also, that there will be no tariff.
Between India and US, trade talks have been going on, negotiations have been going on. In fact, we have, I think a team is just going at this point. These are very complicated negotiations. They are very intricate. Nothing is decided till everything is. But any trade deal has to be mutually beneficial. Any trade deal has to work for both the countries.
So what will India's approach be going into these talks? Will India change tack in the latest round of negotiations? Rishabh Bhatnagar from NDTV Profit has this report.
Right, what we're hearing with respect to Piyush Goyal's visit to Washington is the fact that he'll be there from May 17 to May 20. He's expected to meet two very important figures of the Trump administration. Number one being the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, and number two being the U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Very importantly, this is the third round of talks, in-person talks, that is set to happen between India and the U.S. In March, we had talks take place in Delhi, where a team from the US came in to Delhi, and just last month in April we had India's chief negotiator Rajesh Agarwal go out to the US, to Washington for negotiations. So this is the third round where the two countries will now build upon the sort of talks that they've had so far over the past couple of months in person. At least very important context of these talks is also the fact that US-China relationships have somewhat eased. There is both the countries have cut the reciprocal tariffs that they imposed on each other. What we're also seeing is the fact that India has chosen to retaliate at the World Trade Organization. That is also some sort of posturing that may or may not have an impact on the bilateral trade talks that are continuing between the two countries. Remember the deadline that the two countries had set for the first tranche of the bilateral trade agreement was September-October, and the 90-day tariff pause period ends in July. So far none of my sources in the government have indicated that it's not a possibility that a trade deal or a mini trade deal could be reached by July. So lots to keep our eyes peeled on with respect to Piyush Goyal's visit to Washington.
In other news now, President Donald Trump has wrapped up his trip to the Middle East, which saw stops in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. The Shabakchi has more on the visit that was full of pomp and business deals.
Aerial escorts, gilded welcomes, and billion-dollar deals. President Donald Trump's 4-day, 3-nation tour to the Middle East, filled with spectacular fanfare and even a royal parade of camels, successfully brought the region back on Washington's side, after fractures appeared under former President Biden. If the Gulf were having a popularity contest, it seems Donald Trump would be crowned the winner. Despite a war raging on, this trip was not about diplomacy. Instead, Trump's art of the deal was on full display. Trump, flanked by his business entourage including Elon Musk, BlackRock chief Larry Fink, OpenAI Sam Altman among others, inked deals worth billions with Saudi Arabia, Qatar and UAE on everything from defense to trade to AI. In Riyadh, the US secured investments worth $600 billion from Saudi Arabia. The details, though, remain unclear. Trump inked a $1.2 trillion deal with Qatar, including Qatar Airways' $96 billion Boeing order. Finally, in Abu Dhabi, Trump focused on AI and inked deals worth $200 billion. Diplomacy, though, was not left out of the trip entirely. After President Trump met Syria's interim president Ahmed al-Shara, the first such encounter between the two nations' leaders in 25 years. A meeting for the history books, it came after the US lifted all sanctions on Syria. The US leader also took the opportunity to target Iran, pressuring Tehran to give up its nuclear program days after officials from both countries held a fourth round of talks in Oman.
But with that said, Iran can have a much brighter future, but will never allow America and its allies to be threatened with terrorism or nuclear attack. The choice is theirs to make. We really want them to be a successful country. We want them to be a wonderful, safe, great country. But they cannot have a nuclear weapon. This is an offer that will not last forever.
The optics were ideal, with Arab leaders showcasing larger-than-life grandiosity to boost ties with the White House to further their agendas at a time of global turmoil and uncertainty. Trump's massive deal-making skills, though, has left Tel Aviv worried over Washington's stilt in foreign policy. The question is, how will closer ties with the Arab world affect this once unbreakable relationship? Disha Bagchi, NDTV World.
The US Supreme Court has heard arguments on a case related to Trump's executive order, which seeks to end birthright citizenship. It's a matter that affects undocumented and legal immigrants, such as Indians here on work permits. The US Constitution grants citizenship to children born in the US irrespective of their parents' nationality or immigration status. Multiple lower courts in the US, judges there having blocked Trump's ban, but the Trump administration wants the Supreme Court to decide if those judges have the right to be able to block presidential orders across the country. Okay, now the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection, or ICAP, is challenging Trump's executive order before the Supreme Court. I am joined by ICAP's legal director, that's Rupa Bhattacharya. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a busy time for you with all the litigation in the Supreme Court, but let me ask you firstly, the Supreme Court justices are not looking directly into the merits of birthright citizenship, so to speak, but rather if a lower court ruling should be limited to each individual state and not to the whole country. Rupa, tell me, why should a single judge or a bunch of them at a lower court be allowed to have that authority nationwide?
Well, so it's a complicated question, and thank you so much for having me today. there are a number of statutes that allow for nationwide relief. So it is something that is contemplated in U.S. law, but everyone agrees that it should be done relatively rarely, so that cases can percolate in the various federal courts, and the Supreme Court, when it's ultimately presented with an issue, has the benefit of a number of judges having considered the issue and decided upon it. Our argument is that birthright citizenship is very different because it's a fundamental constitutional right, and because citizenship is so foundational to our country and to our union. It would be completely chaotic and really untenable to have citizens babies be born as citizens in one state, but not in another state, even as a preliminary matter while this case is being litigated. So in this circumstance, we do think that this is one of the rare cases where a nationwide injunction makes a lot of sense.
Rupa, what was the sense you got from the Supreme Court judges when they spoke on perhaps where they stand? What sense did you get on where they stand as far as birthright citizenship, the very core of the issue, goes?
So some of the justices didn't say anything on that topic. Those who, because it's not the issue before the court at this stage, those who did speak on the topic seemed pretty clear that they thought that the order was unconstitutional because it is birthright citizenship is a constitutional guarantee, but it's not, at least as the case is currently presented to the court, it's not likely that they will make a definitive ruling on that question at this stage, although they may, as we say, take a peek at the merits in order to determine whether or not an injunction is appropriate.
Rupa, remind us what would happen if birthright citizenship is taken away. How would it impact, say, an Indian couple working in the US on an H-1B visa and decides to have a baby?
So the executive order redefines birthright citizenship from what it has been for over 100 years in this country to exclude babies whose parents are either in the U.S. illegally or in the U.S. temporarily. And so the temporary category would include anyone that is here on a work visa or a tourist visa or a student visa. And so children who are born to parents where one parent is here temporarily would not be birthright citizens unless the father is either a legal permanent resident of the United States, a green card holder, or a U.S. citizen himself. That would exclude
Rupa,
a very
very
large
quickly.
number of children.
Rupa, very quickly, running out of time here. When would we expect a ruling from the Supreme Court on the case?
It's hard to tell, but most likely not until June or the early part of July, which is when the Supreme Court term ends.
All right, thank you very much indeed for coming on Washington Watch. That's Rupa Bhattacharya there joining us here this morning. In other news now, a Republican lawmaker is introducing legislation for Trump's ban on transgender troops so it becomes permanent federal policy. The latest developments come after the Supreme Court basically decided that recently it allowed the Trump administration, at least for now, to enforce its ban that was previously blocked by a lower court. Legal challenges to the ban will continue, but for now, thousands of US transgender troops will be forced out of the military. For more, we are joined by Colonel Bree Fram, an openly transgender member of the US Space Force. Fram is also one of the highest-ranking transgender service members in the US Armed Forces. Thank you very much, Colonel Fram, for joining us here on Washington Watch. Firstly, Colonel Fram, how are you feeling after everything that's happened?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I have to note that I am here speaking with you in my personal capacity, and my views are not necessarily reflective of the United States government or the Department of Defense. But I am heartbroken. I look around and I see transgender service members here in the United States who have served openly for nearly a decade, accomplishing incredible things and meeting every standard, doing exactly what this nation has asked of them, facing the loss of their careers, their livelihoods, and what they have cared so much about.
All right, Colonel
Well,
Fram, the
first,
Trump
thank you for
administration
having me.
says having transgender troops undermines readiness of the US military. What would you have to say to that?
Well, I think you can look at our service records and our ability to perform our mission both here at home and deployed all around the world. Or the argument that says we're not deployable, while at the same time, many transgender people are deployed right now, today, accomplishing their mission. So for all of these claims, there is no evidence to back that up, and we have now had multiple judges rule just that. They have pointed to our service records as Exhibit A as to why many of the arguments advanced by the administration have no merit.
Yeah, right. But Colonel Fram, the Supreme Court has allowed the ban for now. Wondering what your reaction was when that came down.
I was shocked. I truly was shocked because precedent has long said that the courts should act in a way that preserves the status quo so that no harm can be done while we go through with the litigation on a policy. And in this case, we are seeing real harm. We are seeing lives upended, careers ended, and a whole huge number of people who are facing the loss of everything. And so I was just incredibly sad as to what happened from the Supreme Court.
Now, Colonel Fram, along with other trans active duty members, you have until next month to step aside voluntarily. Wondering what you've decided.
Well, first, I want to make it clear this is not a voluntary separation. No one would be leaving if this policy didn't say you need to get out now or you may be facing adverse consequences. So the decision is really very personal and depends a lot on anyone's individual circumstance. I'm going to take as much time as possible to understand and wait for service level policy to be published before making any sort of decision that is going to affect my career, that is going to affect the lives of my family. And I would encourage any other service member to do the same, where we get as much information as possible before making whatever decision takes into account our needs and that of our families.
Now, the Supreme Court decision has given the Trump administration, of course, this big win. Litigation continues in the lower court. But are you expecting any kind of reversal in your favor in the future, or do you think that the writing is pretty much on the wall right now?
Well, we're going to let the court cases play out because while the Supreme Court let the government's policy go into effect, so far through the courts that have ruled on the merits of the case, they have shown that the government's policy simply lacks any sort of evidence to back up the claims that it's making. So while I believe there is hope that the courts could continue to rule in our favor, by the time we get to that point, the damage of this policy will have been done, and we may have lost a generation's worth of transgender service members.
Michael, from just looking broadly here, away from just the United States, do you worry that this has set the clock back for countries around the world who are considering perhaps allowing transgender troops or haven't done so yet fully? India perhaps is an example.
I think it's important to note our history here in America of inclusion, where every argument that has been levied against a group that has joined the military, whether that was African Americans, women, lesbians, or gays, were the same argument used against transgender people. And every time that group proved just how capable they were of serving, and our military emerged stronger because of it. So I believe that any nation that cuts off access to talent is deliberately limiting its capability.
Thank Thank you very much indeed, Colonel Fram, there joining us here on Washington Watch. Next week, President Donald Trump will host a controversial dinner at his golf course near D.C. Around 200 of the highest bidders who invested in Trump's meme coin have been awarded the exclusive invite. Trump's auction has raked in nearly $150 million, raising ethical concerns over Trump profiting from his presidency. In an exclusive NDTV interview, one crypto meme company in Singapore told me how much it's cost them for a seat at the table. Cherry, your company had already been investing in Trump meme coins. How much more did you have to put in?
Yeah, so in the beginning, we already watching, like we are interested about Trump token for a long time since it launched. And then we saw this event. So we think, okay, it's a really good chance we should participate in this event. So at the time, we aggressively, we add around 50% more. So I couldn't say how much exactly we put in, but so far until now, based on the market price, it looks like around $20 million US. Yeah.
Okay, $20 million. Now the bidding has closed for the dinner, but are you still going to invest in Trump's meme coin? Do you have any sort of upper limit?
We don't have the exactly budget for it, actually.
Unlimited?
Yes.
Okay, Cherry, why exactly did you decide to participate in this contest?
It was like a strategy and like a meaningful decision for us because many people say meme is slowly going to die now. So we want to let people know actually meme culture, meme is emerging again. So I think this is a really good opportunity for us to show the power.
But even with Trump's meme coin, the value has dropped. So aren't you worried about that?
No, as I say, the goal in the beginning, we do these things not for investment. So actually, the pricing or the revenue is not really affect our decisions. Yeah, we are more looking for how is the community reactions and how is the people know about meme and people reaction about meme communities.
Time for a quick wrap on some other stories that made headlines this week in the United States. President Trump says the US is getting close to securing a nuclear deal with Iran. One of the senior-most Iranian officials in Iran told NBC News Tehran would forego highly enriched uranium in exchange for lifting of sanctions. The remarks are the first public statement on Iran's willingness towards a deal. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is set to meet US President Donald Trump next week in a bid to reset ties. This comes after Trump granted refugee status to white South Africans. The relations between both the countries has soured ever since Trump took office, making repeated claims over the discrimination faced by South Africans or white South Africans in the country. Congressman Sri Thanidar has backed off from his threat to force an impeachment vote against President Donald Trump. It comes after Democratic leaders warned the effort was destined to fail and would be nothing but a futile distraction. And in the latest episode of Keeping Up with Christie, days after US President Donald Trump claimed he's getting a luxury plane as a gift from Qatar, US Homeland Secretary Christie Noem made a request for her own private jet. The US Coast Guard has made a last-minute change to its annual budget to secure the $50 million new plane for Noem. That's it for Washington Watch. I'm Allister D'Souza.
Your brain really matters.
Just sorted my guaranteed over 50 plan with Sun Life. There's even a cash payout.
Nice one.
It's given me the confidence to look after myself. I've started learning jiu-jitsu.
Come on!
Search Sun Life Plan today and get a free gift card.
No child should suffer the torture of trachoma, but so many are in pain right now. Nananga's lashes have turned inwards. They rip and tear away at his eyes. Pomelo's sight could be gone forever. He's just 3 years old. Kofanga screams for his mother. His eyes are so infected that he can't even see her. For so many children in the world's poorest countries, trachoma is torture. It's a painful infection often spread by flies, and it's destroying children's eyesight. But it could be stopped if you help today. By calling 0800 021 3925 and giving £2 a month to Sightsavers, you can help make sure children get the treatment they desperately need. You'll help us bring them the medicines and the care that can treat infections. And that means you'll be helping to save children from the torture of trachoma and a life of blindness. Please help us reach them. Call 0800 021 3925, text C7 to 82727, or go online and give just £2 a month now. Because we need you to help save the sight of children like Nananga. We need you to help save them from the torture of trachoma.
Some people think life slows down in your 50s, but I've got a few rounds left to go. And yeah, I will be retiring in a few years, so it makes sense to plan ahead.
Come on, Mary.
That's why I decided to learn more about over 50s life insurance from Cover Today. Look, the kids don't need the money, but it's nice to leave something to help with funeral costs and other expenses, so they can spend their money on nicer things. Cover Today are the only over 50s life insurer with no waiting period, unlike other insurers who could make you wait up to 2 years for full cover. With Cover Today, you're fully covered from day one. Come on! And you're covered for the whole of your life, so you can just get on with things. Plus, unlike other things in life, the price never goes up. Their claims process is really straightforward, so your loved ones will be looked after. Learning more couldn't be simpler and can be done in just a few minutes. Go online or talk to one of their friendly UK team who will chat you through your options in just one phone call.
Cover Today are the only over 50s life insurer with no waiting period. Get covered in minutes with no annoying trips to the doctor. With fixed monthly payments, prices start at just £4.42 a month. Plus, you get your choice of a £125 gift card.
So stop putting it off and get it sorted. That way you can get on with doing something much more interesting.
To find out more about Cover Today, call our friendly UK team on 0800 977 6552 or visit covertoday.co.uk.
I bought cars on finance, so I've made my claim.
If our lenders charge hidden commissions, then I've made my claim.
I could be on thousands.
I've made my claim.
I've made my claim.
I've made my claim.
I've made my claim. It's so quick and simple.
You could be owed thousands in hidden commissions from vehicles bought on finance since 2007, even without the details.
I've made my claim.
Trust myclaimgroup.co.uk.
Claims made simple.
I've been thinking, I want to plan my funeral so it feels more like a celebration. My parents always said I was born dancing. I just love it. Bhangra, disco, even line dancing. So when my time comes, I want to have music, dancing, the lot.
With over 150 years experience, you can count on Co-op Funeral Care to help you pre-plan the funeral you want. To find out more, visit Co-op Funeral Care or give us a call.
The deterrence is what it was aimed at. India's restraint is not weakness. It is maturity, is what most war and defense experts think. India imposed costs, redefined thresholds, and retained escalation dominance. India struck at the heart of the terror establishment inside Pakistan. The message is clear: enough is enough. Prime Minister Modi has made it clear that India will not tolerate another terror attack emanating from Pakistan and will not refrain from taking a harder action in the future. The ball is now firmly in Pakistan's court. Will it continue to harbor terrorists, or will it learn its lesson and behave? One thing is clear, loud and clear, that Operation Sindoor is the new normal, and our neighbor, as well as the larger world, will have to deal with this reality. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh has put Pakistan on notice with a stern "picture abhi baki hai" warning. On the show tonight, we discuss what lies ahead or what lies next in this India-Pakistan saga. We have Lieutenant General Ata Hasnain joining us. We also have former Indian Ambassador to France joining us, Javed Ashraf. Ambassador Ashraf, beginning with you, we'll be also joined by some British commentators in just a bit. Ambassador Ashraf, beginning with you, in terms of the messaging, do you think the world has understood that this is the new normal, that India will not tolerate and will not stop at targeting, right going inside Pakistan if the need be, if there is another misadventure?
Well, if the first, it's for Pakistan to recognize and realize the seriousness of the new doctrine, our posture, and the response that will follow any future terrorist attack. I think that's both what they have to see on the ground, but it is also what they have to recognize and believe at the psychological level. Because part of this deterrence must be also that there is an unambiguous message to the adversary that any future terrorist activities or an attack would involve or invite a retaliation that may even exceed what they have experienced so far. Of course, we're maintaining strategic ambiguity in terms of the scope, the scale, the nature, and the impact of a terrorist attack that would trigger a military response from our side. And that is important to maintain that kind of strategic ambiguity. And therefore, I think now we're at a stage where we have to be able to convey through information and psychological messaging that there is, and that in this particular episode, that the incidents that we have seen so far had been one in which we were able to inflict significant damage, that we would have prevailed in the escalation dominance, and that if this had escalated any further, the retaliation would have been at a much higher level, and that nothing that has happened will in any way shake or dilute our will to continue with the same course of action. Why I say this, Maria, is because they drew different conclusions in 1999 and in 2002. They drew a conclusion in 1999 that if it hadn't been for President Clinton's intervention, Pakistan would have prevailed. And in 2002, they drew a different conclusion, that is, Indian forces take a long time to mobilize, and therefore a very sharp surgical surprise attack on the neck of India can sever Jammu and Kashmir away from the rest of the country. And I say this because they had shared this with the Americans. Americans had shared this with us. We had conducted a separate study. So to us, apart from what we have inflicted, the nature of messaging, signaling, both to Pakistan and to the international community, on A, what was achieved, B, what would be the resolve if going forward on this, because Prime Minister has clearly articulated a doctrine which has some very important elements in it, and which actually goes beyond what we have done in after Pahalgam in Operation Sindoor, because it now formally erases the distinction between terrorists and state sponsors of terrorism, which was the third element. So I think that messaging now has to continue to be unambiguous and very, very clear. That's an important source of deterrence.
Okay. Daryl Kimball is also joining us. He's the Executive Director at Arms Control Association. But before that, Lieutenant General Hasnain, the question here is, in this military supremacy that India has, communicated, it has redefined thresholds. How do you think how effective do you think that communication was?
Maria, if you permit me, I will change your question.
Sure, sir.
It should be the capability which we have demonstrated, not communicated, demonstrated. Communication is something different. This is a question of demonstration here. We have shown them the political will, the technological superiority, the ability to strike at targets of choice. and I compliment Ambassador Ashraf for his understanding of the entire thing which he has explained. I would sum up that entire strategy which he's just spoken of as hybrid versus hybrid. You see, all this while, Pakistan has been targeting us with hybrid war, below the radar, terrorist actions, financial conduits, drug circuits all over, psychological warfare, information warfare. We have been targeting him with what? Just a military strike in 2016, an air strike in 2019. Those were strategic messaging, nothing more. This time, a proper message of deterrence has gone. And also at the same time, since we have used other domains, like something which we never used to tread upon, the waters issue, the IWT issue, right? Diplomacy as a measure. All this has come together now. And as I said, the doctrine is all about, if you are going to go hybrid, we have different ways of going hybrid and countering your hybrid. So I think it's the restraint we have been able to convey, and at the same time, the message of deterrence that we have been be able to convey has been the marked achievement this time.
Okay, I'm going to come back to you again, Lieutenant General Hasnain, but Daryl Kimball, what do you think has been the big message that has been communicated through Operation Sindoor, which was carried out by Indian Armed Forces, according to you?
Well, I think we need to step back from the analysis of, what each side achieved militarily in terms of messaging, and we need to understand that this was yet another close call between India and Pakistan involving kinetic warfare, precipitated by the heinous terrorist attack in April. And the two sides were once again lucky that there was not a more severe miscommunication about intentions, about targeting, a further escalation. And the question I think that should be asked at this stage and pursued by both sides is, how do we avoid miscommunication in the future? And that involves better diplomatic channels of communication before and during a crisis. And what are we going to be doing to reduce the risk that a future event is going to escalate to a full-out ground war, which this looked like it was going to become if there was not international mediation? And is there going to be a longer-term ongoing dialogue between the two countries about addressing some of the underlying issues that have fueled the tensions between India and Pakistan for all these years? I'm very concerned about the lack of reflection on both sides about how this may have gone wrong. So those are some of the things that I'm taking away from this. I agree with the previous speakers that India, the strikes were more powerful, they were targeted, they appear to have been effective in hitting the particular terrorist targets, but that alone is not going to eliminate the underlying motives of these militia groups and terrorists in the long term. And there was also, I think we need to acknowledge, concern on the part of the United States and others that the two sides might have been reaching a point at which this was going to escalate out of control. So those are my reflections on the situation, and I'm relieved that there's a ceasefire, but I'm concerned that there is not a longer-term plan for avoiding future conflicts and escalation scenarios.
General Hasnain, the point being made, of course, is also about contained time frame, in the sense that it all happened in a controlled precision and decisive, without hesitation. Those were the defining words when India carried out these precision strikes.
No, so then what exactly is the question that you are asking?
So, yes, so when Defense Minister says, picture abhi baki hai, what does it actually mean?
This is what is communication. This is actually the whole business of hybridity. You see, you go in with the restraint up to a point, and I agree with John Gimble that yes, there could have been miscommunication here, but we were all the time maintaining the pressure. That was important. And we made it very clear right in the beginning, we targeted terrorist infrastructure, the jihadi terror infrastructure. What we got in response from Pakistan was the next step towards escalation, and that was an attempted targeting of military garrisons and cities. That was clear escalation on their part. And it was India's, I would say, India's strategic patience which ensured that we did not go beyond a certain step. We escalated to go against the airfields, etc. But then we were forced to do that. Without that, the messaging would not have gone home clearly. And it would have been Pakistan which would have come out the better at the end of it to say, see, exactly what we did in 2019, we could not respond to what they finally did from their side. So I think that restraint, which we have sort of demonstrated here, was a very, very important aspect, but it's not necessary that that restraint is going to remain there. And it's not even necessary that the situation is going to continue to be the same, because the situation is still tenuous, and as already outlined by our Prime Minister, that the operation is continuing. Operation Sindoor is very much continuing. So that's the message which is there.
And another message, Ambassador Ashraf, was that this constant blackmail of nuclear weapon, which continued during those 4 days and even continues now.
Well, first of all, Maria, let me respond to Mr. Kimball's points of view. Now, first, I'd like to say that it's precisely this kind of double standards, this wisdom that is thrust upon us by Western countries, particularly the United States and the UK, that leads Pakistan to believe that it can get away with practicing cross-border terrorism. Whereas countries have flown aircraft and sailed aircraft carrier thousands of kilometers away in pursuit of terrorists and bombed places because of the security threats that they have faced, whether it is Sahel or whether it is Afghanistan or whether it is the Middle East. But they apply obviously a very different sets of standards for us. And if they think about talking in terms of two militarily capable nuclear-armed powers, then I'd like to remind them that for 3 years they have been persisting in a war in Europe, in Ukraine, against a major nuclear power, Russia. And they have managed to do this for 3 years, despite the fact that Russia had, on a number of occasions, doled out nuclear threats over red lines being crossed. Of course, those red lines were crossed a number of times, and Russia did not follow through with its nuclear threats. So I don't think that that kind of sermon is particularly required over here. The second point I wanted to make is, in response to what he said, is that we've tried everything conceivable for the past 30 years to bring Pakistan to change its behavior. We've tried diplomatic engagement with Pakistan. Remember, after Pathankot, we had actually done the unprecedented thing of inviting ISI and Pakistan security agencies to jointly investigate. And what we got in return was obfuscations and denials, and absolute lack of any action, as it was also in the case of 2008 terrorist attack. We worked with the international community. We have seen what we have done in FATF and the UN Sanctions Committee. And none of this has changed Pakistan's behavior. In fact, through the 2000s, Pakistan received much larger sums of money every year for doing less and less in terms of the war in Afghanistan and in terms of taking or dismantling the terrorism infrastructure in our country. That was also the case after the Mumbai terror attack. So I don't see this kind of a wisdom prevailing. And let me tell you something that we haven't pointed out with regard to this particular response from India, that for the first time, we have changed the patterns of response, and take my words very carefully. Okay. And what we have done is taken control of the levers of post-attack developments in a way that has preempted international mediation, which in the past enabled Pakistan to get away with the terrorism by taking some cosmetic steps on terrorism. For example, hiding away Hafiz Saeed and Maulana Masood Azhar, putting some of them behind bars, taking some cosmetic steps on terror financing, etc. And as soon as the world forgot about it, they moved on and they all came back. So this time, that pattern of response has changed. And remember, we took the responsibility for our security in our own hands without waiting for a response. The message on the ground was very clear. The message from Prime Minister in his speech was even clearer going forward. And we have to look at diverse instruments of deterrence. And the deterrence comes both from imposing a cost and raising the cost of a terror attack. And it doesn't only mean punitive. I have also spoken about it. It has to be predictive. We have to improve that capacity. Although, as I say, terrorism wins by winning one day, security agencies lose by not winning all 365 days. We have to be doing better on preventive and preemptive measures, but the punitive steps will always be there. And I think when Prime Minister articulated that doctrine, which had, that Operation Sindoor remains in some sense operational, and the three-pronged doctrine going forward, and that no talks or trade or water till terrorism stops, clearly now, clearly lays down our position with regard to Pakistan. Now, will that stop? We have known all over the world that military force doesn't dismantle terrorism completely, but it certainly will raise the cost for them. And we will continue to work on diplomatic measures. We will continue to work on FATF, UN's Sanctions Committee. We'll continue to engage our interlocutors in the West and to see if they really stand by their conviction on zero tolerance for terrorism, or is it that one set of terrorists need to be taken care of and others not? And the big question I have often raised is that there are countries that are considered state sponsors of terrorism who have done much less than Pakistan in terms of terrorist activities. And yet they continue to face comprehensive sanctions from Western countries, whereas Pakistan, which has, you look at any terrorist activity in Europe, United States, or anywhere, and you would find somewhere the link goes back into Pakistan. Yet they continue to receive massive aid, continue to enjoy good relations with the Western countries. So I think we in India have recognized that, this kind of wisdom that we get from the West is only meant for us. There is a different set of standards that they practice for themselves, whether it is in designating countries as state sponsors of terrorism or in the actions that they take. So that is but the message, and let me also use the word restraint, since restraint is actually a choice. It is not a compulsion. Right. And it is only those who have power exercise restraint. And it is also always the greatest warriors, the greatest generals, who often act with the highest measure of restraint. This is true, and this has also been shown in the action that we took after what was not just an act of terrorism or linked to Jammu and Kashmir. It was meant to incite a religious conflagration everywhere.
Ambassador Ashraf, thank you so much. And I think it goes completely in sync what the topic of this discussion was, that restraint is not weakness, it is maturity. You are saying that restraint is a choice, not a compulsion. So thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Ashraf, Lieutenant General Atta Hasnan, and Daryl Kimball. We have British commentator David Vance joining us now. Mr. Vance, thank you. Most commentators and analysts are of the opinion that India has convincingly won this conflict between the two nations, and that Operation Sindoor has been a decisive and a huge success. As someone who has a bird's eye view of what played out between the two countries, what's your assessment?
Yeah, no, I would agree with much of what you say. I believe that Operation Sindoor was a great success. I don't think, though, that the job is absolutely finished. I think that I'm actually of the opinion that it's a pity there was a ceasefire, because I think India has no option but to completely denuclearize Pakistan. It has to deal with the terrorism that is endemic in Pakistan. So I think it was a great success. The Western media has not presented it like that, disappointingly. They've presented it as if it were some kind of a draw, but it wasn't. Pakistan were well and truly whipped, and that's good.
Okay, Mr. Vance, one message certainly has been communicated is that India did not go for a prolonged war. It acted with great restraint. There was a goal which was achieved, and it managed to ensure that Pakistanis asked for ceasefire. And of course, but there is a picture which is being conveyed by the Western media. Why is it that the real picture is not coming out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer is that Pakistan is pretty good at international propaganda. I think it's very good at that. It's about the only thing it's good at. India, perhaps not just as good. But then again, I mean, the Western media itself is problematical. I mean, I have very little confidence in the Western media. But I've said, and this is the message I think that we should be getting out, that India's fight is the fight of the West as well. For the world to be safe and stable, we cannot have rogue nations like Pakistan operate in the way that they do. So I think it's in the interests of the US, the UK, the European Union, everywhere, to stand with India as it tries to deal with a very difficult problem. And Pakistan, it is difficult, not least because it's got China backing it to a significant degree. So we should be, but maybe India, and this is the thing that I try to do in my own small way. I try to put out in the Western media pro-India messages so that people in the West can better understand what India faces.
Mr. Vance, what according to you was the objective of Operation Sindoor, and in terms of its strategic supremacy, has India sent a huge message to the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think India sent a huge message to Pakistan in the first place, insofar as it demonstrated India's complete military superiority over Pakistan. That was demonstrated very clearly. It also showed the rest of the world that India can, if necessary, stand alone against Pakistan. It doesn't need necessarily allies, although it would be good if it did. So by taking out, for example, the Pakistan terror infrastructure that it did, I mean, I think that's very positive. Although the problem is that, I don't think all terrorists, Pakistani terrorist groups operating from within Pakistan I don't think they've all been destroyed, and they should be all destroyed. So I think, yes, it was a really powerful message from Prime Minister Modi to the world and to Pakistan, and I hope they listen.
One view certainly is that India enforced a doctrine on sovereign terms, using sovereign means. David Vance, in terms of recent conflicts, how do you see India protecting its sovereignty when it had to?
Yeah, I think India has clearly sent a message to the world that it will protect its sovereignty, and Prime Minister Modi has shown he will do that which is necessary. And the rest of the world needs to understand that fully. But I think they probably do understand that military, from a military point of view, India has overwhelming superiority, and it's demonstrated this in Operation Sindoor. So that's why I think it's a good thing. It needed to be done, to be honest. This operation was overdue. So it's really good that it's happened, and it should send a signal to those in Pakistan and to their supporters around the world that you do not trifle with India at your peril.
All right, David Vance, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on this edition of The Big Fight. That's all from me. I'll be seeing you next week. But before that, quick wrap up. In another 30 seconds, we are playing that exclusive interview on India Through the Eyes of Its Icons. This is a special interview with Saeed Karmani.
From the time when there was no shoes to play, and today when you see cricket being what it is, I mean, almost the mecca of all money.
We had no proper equipment in our time. There was nobody to tell what talent we had, nobody to tell us play cricket. No coach. We won the World Cup. In our time, there was no television, by the way. Transistor, radio, that's it. Our board was the poorest in the world.
Today it is the richest.
Today we are the richest.
Mr. Karmani, you have been part of that generation which actually catapulted Indian cricket to the global era.
This three-letter word is a global problem. EGO. By that statement of Kapil Dev, the egos of the seniors went shutting. Hey, the captain has given us the responsibilities.
For such gentle souls, working donkeys in the Middle East lead terribly hard lives. For such trusting animals, donkeys are too often abused and exploited.